Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Ministry Shift, when we're looking at what it means to minister in a rapidly changing world due to the coronavirus outbreak. How are we reshaping our ministry in these challenging times? And the good news is that Ministry Shift is going to be out on Thursdays as well. So tune in at 4:30 this coming Thursday. But for today, we're going to think about funerals, something that is in many ways our bread and butter as ministers, and yet has had to be radically rethought and rechanged. And I'm glad that I've got old stager Jim Trude with us. Hello, Jim.
Hello there, it's good to be with you again.
But we do have some new guests, so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And Margaret, tell us who you are.
I'm Reverend Margaret Sherwin, the Area Rector for Uttoxeter, with responsibility for 11 churches.
And you're also a funeral champion.
I am a funeral champion. I am for the Deanery of Uttoxeter.
Great. Andrew.
I'm Andrew Swift, and I am the Team Rector Designate of the new North Potteries team in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm the Funerals Champion for the Stoke-on-Trent Deanery. Brilliant.
And Debbie.
I'm Reverend Debbie Lochran, and I am the Vicar for Rockwood Wood, Oakengates and Priorslee in the Telford area. I'm also Assistant Area Dean.
Well, thank you to all of you for being with us and being willing to discuss what has proven to be quite a challenging area of ministry over the past few weeks. And I just want to start, Jim, perhaps with you and ask, what has it felt like to be doing funerals under the kind of restrictions that we're under at the moment?
It's felt really surreal, actually, and strange at times. The kind of just from the starting point of knowing that you're not going to necessarily be able to do a funeral as you've done them for many, many years in the past, even through to the graveside or the crematorium, where there may only be one person in the crem with you, or might even be on your own. But at the same time, it has also developed a real sense of intimacy. Sometimes, and I know that the people I've done funerals for have been very grateful that we're still in business and doing those.
I just wonder if any of the others have, perhaps Andrew, how has it been easy to explain to people these restrictions and perhaps the way in which they've changed from one day to the next?
Yes and no. And right at the beginning of the outbreak, I had a funeral that was booked in. It was booked in for church. And then it was going to be a case that, well, it wouldn't be everybody would be able to be there, and then gradually it was going to be fewer and fewer people, and in the end it ended up being at the graveside alone, and that was very difficult for a family to get their head around. I think as time has worn on, people have found it a bit easier to come to terms with the idea of social distancing and not necessarily being present, and explaining to them has become easier, but I don't think the experience at the service has necessarily got a lot easier for people, really.
Yeah.
No, and Margaret, sorry,
I think that's right. I think that at the very beginning, it was really difficult because we never knew what was going to happen next. I had one family that, the same as Andrew, was booked into church, and their funeral actually changed about 4 times, what they could and couldn't have. And for that family, that was absolutely devastating, working from a funeral plan that the deceased had put together, and then whittling it down to it just being a graveside service in the end, trying to do that with hymns and trying to stay close to what the deceased wanted, but with such limited facilities to do that with. I think that afterwards, the sort of memorial services, I think, will be something that we need to look out for, to be able to work with these families pastorally, particularly those ones at the beginning.
Have other people felt the pressure of the funeral plan? This is what my mother really wanted. Margaret, have you had that experience?
Oh, yes. And the difficulty is that the funeral directors want to keep us close to what they've promised someone, and the family members do, and we're working with that. And then the funeral directors are saying to me, Margaret, what can we do? The people, they've paid for this. This is what they want, and we can't give it to them. And I have to say hats off to some of our funeral directors locally. On Friday, it's a committal at the graveside, and they're trying to get a CD player because it's a particular CD that needs to be played. It's not something you can download on a phone. It's a particular, some sort of music from a family member on a CD. And so they're trying to do something different. And I'll let you know how we get on Friday. And I think the sadness is families can't grieve. There's no proper grieving and mourning going on. And the conversations from my point of view, when I phone that family member, normally it's the pre-meeting call that I do, saying, sorry to hear about the death of your loved one, and I'm going to be taking the service. I'd love to come and meet with you. And that's not what's happening now. So we're seeing those faces for the first time at either the graveside or the crematorium. And so although there's a bit of a relationship being built up in the telephone conversations, and I have to say all of mine, and we're doing 2 or 3 funerals a week here, and all of them are very different conversations. The starting points are very different for each of them. And it's exhausting. It is emotionally and mentally, for me, exhausting, trying to hold all of that without making that physical connection with families. And the conversations, when, as we know, when we visit someone in their home, you see a photo of a couple on Blackpool Beach or something, and it starts another strand of conversation and they engage. We haven't, well, for me, I don't have that now because I'm on the end of a telephone. So that's where I'm finding it's very different, and I'm learning. I mean, I've been doing funerals for over 20 years and just learning new ways of doing things.
Jim, there's the funeral, but as Margaret's already pointed us to, there is the pastoral care that inevitably and hopefully would surround it. Have you found doing that by phone?
All of the people who I've done funerals for so far have actually been church members or very closely related to the church, and so would have been very big funerals, up to 300 or 400 people in some cases. But I think in some respects the church members have been particularly understanding of the situation, and the resources that have been provided by the Church of England, lighting a virtual candle, and also the online services that we've actually got sheets printed out and people can use those in their own homes. They have helped, definitely.
Yeah. Andrew, memorial services, I mean, that's one thing we can hold out for people, but I just wonder how that's going to work come the autumn or whenever this lockdown ends.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, it's a case of trying to work out and keeping track of the number of funerals that we're doing, so we know roughly how many of these memorial services we're likely to have. I mean, I'm making a note in my book of, the families that are either asking for them already, or that based on what we're able to provide now, whether that seems like it's going to be an appropriate thing. I mean, I had a funeral service this afternoon that was 3/4 of an hour long with a burial with a bagpiper. I don't think we're going to need a memorial service as well. We've sort of done everything that we would normally do. But I think with cremations, it's certainly going to be easier from my perspective and from my churchmanship, because we'll have the reception of the remains into church with the requiem mass and all of that kind of stuff for the burial of the remains. And so for some of the certainly church family members, they're all right with that. They can cope with the private family grief now, and they're quite relieved at that. They don't have to keep up with the Joneses. And then we'll do some sort of public celebration a bit later on. So I think there's ways of being creative with it, and just sort of keeping track of which families are likely to want it and which families are perhaps going to be, well, quite happy is the wrong way but of saying it, but they're going to be quite content not to have anything else later on because they've done it now, and the gap will be too long a time.
Thank you, Debbie. Have you kind of approached the pastoral angle and response?
I think, like everybody else, it varies from family to family. When we're speaking to them initially with that opening phone call to say we're taking the funeral and we are the minister, I think you're led then by the family as to where we go next. And for some of the families, that then goes to email, because that's how they are used to responding.
Right.
And so you're in some ways only getting the information that they want to share with you. Whereas when you were doing the visit, you could take conversations down other routes and find out more information. But then also, it depends on what information you want, because saying a full eulogy just to immediate family doesn't work for the families that I've been working with, because they know all that information anyway. And so a lot of my phone calls has been much more pastoral than information gathering. So we've been asking families, or I've been asking families, to share a memory, because all their favourite memories will be different to one another's. And so it's not a traditional eulogy as such, but it enables them to share the life of their loved one in a different way that they will all engage with. And so, yeah, so the pastoral side of it has been slightly more nuanced, I guess, as the conversations unfold. And then the post-funeral visit, obviously, is by telephone then as well, which is challenging, but equally, at least you've got some links there to work with.
Thank you.
I found the pastoral side of things on email. Some people have really appreciated that, because that's allowed them to grieve in a slightly different sort of way privately, and then actually to share what they want. The difficulty is sometimes some people don't have email, and that's been more challenging.
Just before we wrap up on the show, but also on this question of pastoral care, Margaret, I know that you've been particularly concerned for those others who are involved in taking or conducting funerals, particularly funeral directors.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been in Uttoxeter for 4 years nearly, and built up a really strong working relationship with the local funeral directors. And as part of my pastoral care, I've always bobbed in most weeks for a coffee and a chat with the funeral directors, just to touch base with them. And I've noticed that under lockdown, I'm phoning them up, and last week was really difficult for all of the funeral directors. Most of them are small entities, but one of the family businesses, which normally only has 4, that can take about 4 usually, had 12 last week. And the funeral director was in tears on the phone to me, because they were running out of body bags, and they were really struggling for PPE, and then 3 hours waiting to collect a body from Derby Hospital. And they were exhausted, and emotionally and mentally. And then another one I spoke to, and she said, I dread coming into work. For the first time in my career, I dread coming into work because I don't know what I'm going to find. Another one, a husband and wife team, and he's now working at the Birmingham International Airport, where they've got space for 2,900 bodies, and it's a mortuary for that sort of amount of people. And they're feeling a lot of pressure, and they can't deliver the service that they are known to deliver. So it's their reputation as much as anything. They're really feeling it. And so, families have been really kind to them and said, you've done, in the circumstances, you've done the best. And I've just been offering the pastoral support for them, because I'm not sure where else they're getting it from.
Yeah, and I think the same is true of staff at crematorium and local authority workers. So it's just worth remembering that, isn't it? That
yes,
there are human beings with who are offering a tremendous service from their heart, and it's good for us to offer what care we can. Well, thank you very much, all of you, and thank you for listening. And tune in on Thursday at 4:30, and again next Monday at 4:30, when once again we'll be thinking about the ministry shift.